So hi guys, welcome to the second podcast where Madlug and the care leaders have conversation around the whole journey of care and helping you understand, either if you're a professional or you're a consumer or part of society, just give you a better picture of what it is to journey through care. I don't perceive to be the expert in this, so it's great to be journeying with the care leaders who are lived experience, but also helping improve the environment for care experienced young people in the UK. So let's get on to our second session, which is messages in behaviour. What children are really telling us through those messages. And today we've got again Corel and we've got Luke from the care leaders as we have this kind of conversation. So Luke, do you want to get us started in this subject, messages in behaviour? What children are really telling us?
Yeah, what children are, I like this topic a lot. I think, so to build on our previous podcast, for those that have heard it, but if they haven't, I can just give a real quick summary. We kind of like looked at the environment children were born into, that children are born into environments to love and to be loved, and that lots of young people, 1 in 5, are born into families of domestic violence, abuse and neglect. So we then explored kind of like how that impacts a young person's behaviour, which is leading us into today's session. And I think messages in behaviour is really key, because if I was to start with the concepts that our sector, children's social care, tends to always look at behaviour in the sense of challenging behaviour or responding to crisis, which is a young person having some form of behavioural outburst. And I wanted to just start by introducing a guiding statement to the session to say that I want this session to uncover that this isn't about challenging behaviour, and we should stop seeing it as challenging behaviour, but we should start seeing it as young people becoming emotionally overwhelmed. So there's lots of stuff that we can go into in terms of like how children grow and develop. So in terms of imprinting and mirroring, like children are born into these family dynamics that are challenging, and psychologically we just copy our parents, and we mirror them. We actually mirror people now because we want to build rapport. So when the young people start to display similar behaviours to those from difficult family environments, we tend to label them as like, they're violent, or they're this, they're that, they're this. And it's like, no, they may be displaying a behaviour that is undesirable, but there's a reason and a message behind it. And this session is all about exploring that.
I suppose one of the key things, again, touching on what Luke just mentioned as well, with labelling young people in care, we tend to only label with negative words and phrases. We never tend to label a young person who is expressing themselves via behavior or via action as, oh, they're doing really well in terms of expressing themselves. We always tend to just go straight for the negative, like, that was very badly behaved, I can't believe you're acting like this. And I also think there's a point here where we have to really highlight for a lot of care experienced young people, children and young people rather, is that we just automatically assume that the default learnt behavior has come from the family home, and therefore as a system we've played no part in this. There's this almost, I don't know, this self-denial that we've played no part as the adults who have now been caring for this child or young person for a considerable amount of time in how they're behaving. And whilst we can, I suppose, link some of those behaviors to early childhood experiences, we have to understand as well the dynamics in which these young people recognize their adults play. So for instance, the foster carer and social worker dynamic. I've been in many foster placements and heard my foster carer being very frustrated with my social worker, and likewise have seen the remarks or the rolling of the eyes or the huffs and the puffs, or that my social worker has made in regard to my foster carer. And so we have to understand that at times young people are picking up on our behaviors too. We can't just keep defaulting it back to, well, that's where they've learned that at home, hasn't it? That could be the only possible explanation for that behavior. We have to understand that those behaviors are also impacted by peer group. They're impacted in school situations, social situations, and via the care system. You know, we mentioned in our last one about language, when we're looking at things like looked after child reviews and so forth. Just in those settings alone, until we start to unpick exactly how each adult plays a role in that environment and really seriously take account and responsibility for how we as the adults, we might think we're behaving very professional because we use these language and tones, and you know, we make notes and so forth, but how are we being perceived? You know, when you've got a healthcare professional in that setting, or somebody from your school who wants to get a point across about your I suppose your character, your personality, and your behavior, and what you're like in school, but that's being disregarded by many other people who on some level appear to have a greater knowledge than that individual. The child's right there watching this dynamic, and we see it, we recognize it, and we internalize that as, so you guys don't really have a voice here. The only people who do, or the only person who does, is the social worker or their team manager. And so we start to disregard those people. And then you find yourself returning back into school or back into your placement. And whilst your carers and your teachers are considering it, I suppose, challenging behavior, it's because you've learned not everybody else respects you. You know, we've picked up on those hidden undertones, those messages that aren't intended to be open and clear, but we've picked up on it, that you don't respect my teacher in this situation, and so why should I? You know, and so we do have to be very, very mindful about just associating behaviors to childhood, home life, and so forth, and stop and recognize the whole environment and the system and the part that that plays.
Yeah, no, I suppose what's coming to my mind whenever you're talking about that, so true, is that we pick up our behaviors from not just one source, it's every source. It's the media. You know, if we're watching lots of on Instagram or on TikTok, we're picking up the kind of sayings and stuff, and all the behaviors are kind of learning from the stuff, our environments around us, the positives and the negatives. And I suppose what I want to really dive into here is the area of whenever we get some kind of notes from care experienced young people into Madlug and saying thank you for receiving a bag and stuff, we hear terms like feeling lost in a care system, unseen, unheard, and so you start to think through. The reality is that, you know, the only people who are making the decisions are adults. There's a file that you never see. There's stuff, and that is so unnormal for any other child, in the sense that nobody's writing a file and not letting about them unless you're journaling their life, and it's the positive stuff. And you have you know, it's if there's a sense of unseen feeling, maybe there's an unseen or an unnoticed place in the professional world, that you're sitting in the room but you're not really there, because you're talking at you know, social worker to foster care, social worker to manager, and while the kid's sitting there, and it reinforces that unseen. So what comes to thinking is that if I'm unseen and I want to be seen, how do you get to be seen in an unseen world? If that's and I hear that quite a lot in the care experience world when they share it. And I also think, because, you know, there are lots of social need and issues, but actually the whole care space is actually an unseen space for society, because you don't leave a train station and see somebody lying on a street. It leads to that potentially, but actually there's nearly an educational piece, because it's an unseen issue, unless you're a professional or a teacher or a police officer or a foster care. You know, if you're not in that space, you don't actually, you know, it is an unseen issue.
Yeah, I like how to be seen in an unseen world. I mean, that is the golden question. There's so much to pick up on that. I think that, Corel, you're absolutely right in terms of like how we develop behavior, because it's kind of like, first of all, we develop a way we behave and then it's reinforced, isn't it? So, and we do have that need to fit in. We're social beings. We do copy and imitate people around us. But I'm really stuck on that point of kind of how do you be seen in an unseen world? And I think there's so many things that pops into my head that I have a real challenge with. Is like, organizations need to change the world. Actually, I think that's what needs to happen first, because young people are trying to be seen in a world that actually, when they get seen in it, they probably don't want to be seen in it, because it doesn't provide them what they need, I suppose, in some circumstances. If I look at this in terms of like engaging young people in service delivery and improvement, like, how can we give you a voice is what I always hear. You don't give young people a voice. Like, we don't have the power to give them it. We create a platform for them to speak. Do you know what I mean? And
they already have a voice.
Yeah, and there's so much within this that we could unpick on a micro level, I think, but there's so much stuff on a micro level that just makes it like this collection of small things. So that I think the whole world needs to change, and giving young people ownership of their solution is really important. And if you look at the John Timpson, for example, Timpson Shoes, his son was Edward Timpson. You know, in my view, arguably the best children's minister we've had. John Timpson does upside down management, backwards management within his organisation, which is saying our staff work for our customers, and our managers work for our staff, and our team managers work for our managers, and our leaders work for our managers, and that's the system. It's starting from the customer, and I think that's what we've just got wrong completely, is that we actually communicate co-design, we communicate we're listening, we communicate this, but actually when you look at the governance systems in place to listen to young people, example being, can young people come and interview staff? Yeah, how much power and weight do they have in that interview? Oh, they don't. Actually, we've given them some preset questions they're just going to ask, and then the person's going to answer them, and then we're actually going to do all the marketing and say thank you. So young people need to be noisy, I think. I think young people need to be given the opportunity to communicate. And I think that, like, unfortunately, we are in a world where young people are going to have to fight a little bit to get heard, because and us professionals, we're going to have to fight, and adults, we're going to have to fight for young people, because at the moment it's too weak how we're trying to provide opportunities for young people to engage and for them to be heard. And it is unfortunate that we're in a position, I think, that we're going to have to we're going to have to create movements. You know, things significantly need to change, and it needs significant challenge. I think that's how people get heard, by making noise. And really highlighting these systems and these issues. I think as a caveat for that, I think there's campaign and lobby groups at the moment that make a lot of noise, but they go to another extreme where it's aggressive noise. And then it prevents other care experienced people from wanting to communicate, because they don't feel that unless they communicate in that way, they're not going to get heard. So we actually, as care experienced people, I would say, from my opinion, observing this, is we're also a fragmented community. We all want to be heard in our own way. We argue with each other sometimes, and we don't come together. So we have a responsibility to sort our act out and to come together as one whole community, which I don't think we're doing very well, which is a really interesting space to be in. And there's so much in that, and the reasons for that, which I'm yet to work out. But a lot of work needs to be done, Dave, I think, in being heard in this heard world.
I think you put your finger on part of this is that, you know, it's the individualism. It's not two stories are the same. And in a system where we have, so I'm thinking of the Madlug customer or somebody in society who has no idea, is that each individual person is unique, and each story and situation is unique. And when you try to bring all that into a system comes into a framework of which then you put everybody into that same. So the fact that you know you're both care experienced, I'm sure your stories are very different.
Absolutely.
And yet, you know, and yet there's a, you know, sometimes in society is like, oh, those are children in care, and that, and then we try and get behavioral, we create narratives around how a child in care. So it's only one way a child in care operates, is that is either they become isolated or outside the extreme behaviors, and they're both extreme behaviors in many ways, but it's that kind of, because that's what they've taken on, that's what they're expected, so they become part of the one way rather than the uniqueness of them. And so I would like to kind of dive more into the reason I brought that part up in the being seen in an unseen world is, you know, there are issues. What would be some of the issues that that are creating the behaviors?
I suppose I'll share with you a story. And I think
Love stories.
get comfy,
Amazing.
guys. Get comfy. I'll try and keep it short.
Amazing. I love it.
So, and I think just to answer your point there, it's a personal thing, and I think you have to be, you know, driven in a certain way to understand young people. And again, like you said, individually. And my story is, I think I was probably around 11, and the two separate people, two very different times. I was 11, had been in care now for quite a considerable amount of time, hated the system, hated everybody within it, was in a children's home. Whilst I said I enjoyed and preferred to live in a children's home than a foster placement, my reasonings were poor, really, when you broke it down. My reasonings were purely just out of, I suppose I had this gang mentality, in the sense of being in a children's home offered me or provided me some level of safety that a foster placement didn't. And I mean that in terms of, we're now a collection of people, and regardless of our backgrounds, how we got here, we all single-handedly know one thing, unspoken: it's us versus them. It's us against them. And so that feeling, and it was never spoken about. It was never, you know, this whole big thing. Half the time we didn't even get on, as Luke mentioned a moment ago. You know, you don't even get on within that community because I don't want to be associated with them. They're in care, and, you know, all these kinds of things. But we knew. And so I never really wanted to go into a foster placement for that reason. Anyway, I had a social worker at the time who had came to my sister and I, who we'd lived together, all our care experience together, because the aim was to keep us together. And this social worker, who was considered quite radical at the time, had asked us both what kind of homes we would like to live in. And it just so happens, believe it or not, we both said very different things. We both had said we wanted two types of different carers for varying different reasons. Now, both of us having a Black parent, well, our mother is Black Caribbean. We had both initially said that that was one of the factors for us in terms of identity and matching. But we'd wanted different things from those carers. I wanted a couple, she wanted somebody single. Anyway, long story short, as short as I can make it, this social worker had actually done a bit of work and had found the kinds of carers we had both asked for. And so we separated and we went to these carers. Now, they'd put in a lot of work to make sure that both carers had kept us having regular contact, because she was my younger sister and I had built this strong need to want to protect her and be around her, and our whole journey and stories were collated as one. Anyway, before this time, I had always been considered a missing young person, and I never come home on time, and I'm bad and I'm rude and I don't abide by the rules. And I'd been living with these foster carers only a short period of time, and my time to return home, I think, was about 9 o'clock or something. I was probably about 12, 13 at this point, and I'd never make it back at 9 o'clock. And they never called the police. And this sounds weird to people. Why would anybody call the police? Because for those who don't know, when you're in care and you don't return to placement at a certain time, you're considered a missing person. But anyway, we'll get into that in another session, I'm sure. So, but these carers never did call the police. And instead, every time I got home, instead of the first thing being, which I initially thought it would be, where have you been? Why are you late? We've waited up all night for you. And this very much, they were the victim in this situation, which I was used to. They would just open the door and let me in, ask if I'd eaten, did I need anything? And I thought, well, this is a bit strange. As time went on, a few weeks, I don't know how they found out or figured it out, but one day I turned back up at home, probably about 10:30, an hour and a half late. And I never forget the foster parent, the female, saying to me, do you know what a great sister you are? I was thinking, what the hell is she on about? She was like, no, you really are an amazing sister. And I thought, here we go. Are they paying them by the minute now? Like our foster care is now being paid by the word. I thought, oh, I just said, you know, the social worker's not around. You don't have to say these kinds of things. Let's not pretend we've got a relationship here, all this kind of stuff. And she said, no, because what I've noticed is the reason why you're late is because you make sure your sister gets home to her placement, and then you spend the 20-minute, 30-minute walk from her placement coming back home. And, you know, in that moment, it was more than just what she was saying that meant something to me. It was more than just her recognizing the message in my behavior, as it were. It was bigger than that. It was her also affirming to me that I was a nice person, that I was a good sister, and I do nice things. Because for the longest time of my care experience, nobody had ever said that. It was, you're bad, we waited up for you, you've caused us problems. And, you know, it was all these kinds of really negative things, that I was just a dreadful person to somebody else. And so that in itself, I think that's the key thing here in terms of messages in behavior. It's more than just recognizing the behavior. It's recognizing what it means, but also what skills can you pull out there? What behaviors that are positive can you highlight for this young person from that? Anyway, long story short, my sister, I never, oh, I'm lying. I didn't never come back late again. I came back late for a variety of different reasons after.
Let's get past that bit. We're trying to have a positive kind of, you know, it's always been misinterpreted, hasn't it, Carol? We've always
completely. It was never me
perfect.
Out in the park drinking with my friends. No, it was always for a great reason. No, but you know, aside from the teenage years and wanting to explore life and have more of what I consider control over who I was and what I was doing, there were moments, and those moments, and clearly, you know, they resonated with me. I never forget those moments. And Luke says it all the time, you know, and we talk about this around this whole idea of people might forget what you did, how it went, what date, but they won't forget how you made them feel. And I never forgot how she made me feel in that moment. That moment just signified everything for me. And it also gave me space to stop always seeing that my sister went home okay, because then we'd have discussions, me and my foster carer, about, but who's making sure you're home safe? You know, why don't, when you've done that, why don't you call us and we'll come and grab you? And, you know, it kind of gave me some sense of, yeah, it's true. So, but yeah, just a little long story.
No, that is fantastic, because I mean, what you're reaffirming there is the importance of listening, the importance of stopping before you speak, stepping out of the victim mindset of which you said, is that it's the impact it has on me.
Yes.
And trying to get, and I think that's we can all learn from that. I mean, I can learn from that as a parent. There's times I get that wrong, where it's, you know, you're straight into the, you shouldn't have done that, you shouldn't have, instead of the why is this, and trying to stop. And most of the time it's down to reasons like, you know, you've said, looking out, helping, and if we only knew that, that would change the dynamics.
Absolutely.
No, so I mean, there's a lot of talk in the care space of trauma, attachment, and behavior kind of coming from the trauma. I mean, where would you guys kind of be thinking around that? Because obviously, you know, the negative behaviors, you know, it can be easily said, oh, that's because of trauma. And I'm sure you do some thinking around this and have opinion on this. So just for those who maybe don't know, or it's all new, put a bit of context into that. Maybe Luke, if you want to.
It's really easy to say that behavior is because of something that has happened previously in somebody's life. So yeah, and that happens. That's one reason that we behave the way we behave. But we'd call that a trigger. There's particular things that young people can experience after a traumatic event happens that takes them back to that traumatic event. So there's a story about somebody throwing something in the first day of a foster placement, and people were trying to work out why they threw something. It was a bowl of food, and the food got launched across the room and everyone responded to it like, oh God, this is unacceptable behavior. Correct. Yeah, that's not acceptable to throw food across the room and must be punished. And we kind of respond exactly straight into that space of saying that this is unacceptable behavior because of all of the things that comes from that. Like, you've just spread that up on your wall. I did this nice thing for you. And you get caught up in that moment, and you nailed it, David. There's a time to like stop and reflect. Now, if you look at that with both adults and young people tend to feel and respond. I feel a certain way and I just respond, right? Adults can feel, most of us can feel, reflect and respond. I feel this way. How am I going to respond to that particular situation? And there's also things put in place within our systems that support adults more than young people. So an example of that being, let's just say an event has happened where we go through divorce or we go through bereavement as adults, we can take compassion leave. A young person goes through bereavement and comes into care. They don't go on compassion leave, you know what I mean? They go into a different form of employment, if you wanted to see it in that way. They go for a completely different system. So adults have this ability to reflect and respond where young people rely on us to do it. So in the situation where a young person throws food, we will punish them for it. And then we often say, why did they do that? And I think there's three key reasons. So given this story of this young person is in the first day of foster placement with people that they don't know. So we could say that the environment is overwhelming them. Yes, that's likely. But what can we do about that? We can't necessarily see if that's true or not. We can't really change the environment, can we really? Because we just put them in a placement there. So what do we do with that message? So the second thing is the food. Is they're eating new food and it maybe look different and it might taste different. So it made them feel a little bit strange inside, and then that's led to that particular thing. Likely also a situation, or is it something that we don't know? Has there been a time in this child's past where they have maybe experienced abuse around food and around a particular situation that's presenting itself now? And one of the key points here is for adults to really hone in on that reflection space. If it seems bizarre and strange, why has this young person just done that? It's probably because they've been triggered. There's something within that space that needs to be kind of nurtured, and to respond with compassion and empathy and understanding. Not to respond with authority. It doesn't work with authority. Authority gets met with authority, especially in a space of I'm feeling this way now, and you're being authoritative. I need to get rid of that. I need to get rid of you. I already feel guilty about what I've done. I don't know what's going on, and now I've got authority. That needs to go, or I need to go. And a space of reflect, compassion, and empathy then gets mirrored because I'm feeling unsafe. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I think. One of the other things I want to draw upon as well, I don't know if now's the right time or we're going to respond to it, is that when we look at messages in behaviour, I always like to think about our system as well. When we think about this particular topic, we always think about what's the messages in young person's behaviour, you know, and if we actually look at our system and how our system behaves, and you know this from Madlug about giving young people integrity and dignity, and that every young person has got value, like, when we start to look at parts of our system, like these looked after children reviews, and how we behave in those particular reviews, and how that behaviour is then perceived and projected onto a young person, there's a lots of messages in our behaviour too that gets picked up by the young person that I think is something that we also need to be aware of and pick up on. Like we inherit these systems. We inherit these ways to engage with young people. We inherit these words that we use, and we somewhat diminish our responsibility to how it's received because it's just been there. I think as a behaviour that we can take forward is to challenge systems that don't seem to be right, to advocate on behalf of the child. The message in that behaviour to a young person is that I, like you, don't agree with this system. I, like you, feel powerless to change it. But I, like you, have a voice, and I, like you, wants to speak. So I'm going to speak, you know. And I remember one story in my particular situation to just close this bit off was really simple thing. When I was brought up, I wanted to go and stay at my friend Jamie's house. And yeah, I was 13 years old. We played rugby together. We were probably going to have a couple of shandies, but I mean, that's fine, right? you know, and I was at his,
Calling it.
yeah, look, yeah. So and I was one of them kids that challenges, you know what I mean? I go home and I said to my foster care, I says, listen, Jamie said I can stay at his house tomorrow night. Can I do it? And I knew that I wouldn't be allowed. I was notorious as well, like infamous for being a bad boy in my local authority. So I knew that the foster carer would do this. I'm going to have to ring the social worker. I knew the social worker would be like, I'm not making that decision. I'm ringing the team manager. And then the team managers, the team manager says, they're really sorry, but you know, they need to be DBS checked. I was CRB checked at the time, which doesn't need to happen anymore. But still, there's a culture that exists where professionals think that families need to be DBS checked. If the children are going to stay over, they don't anymore. That's what delegated authority is about. So my foster carer knew that she could not change that decision. She could not change that system. So she's on the phone. Can Luke stay over? No, he can't. Now that puts the foster care in a really difficult position because they've got to then say to me no because they said so, and that just diminishes. And it's so unfair for a young person. Who do you pinpoint to say this is unacceptable? This is not okay. And lots of foster carers can get into the habit of doing that, saying, you know, or they'll say, no, sorry, you're just not allowed, which is what they're saying when they say that is, I'm saying you can't, which is not the case. It's about saying that this system isn't fair, that I've been told that you're not allowed, and I don't agree with it as well. But what my foster care did at the time, she kicked off down the phone. It was brilliant. She was like, it's absolutely unacceptable. So it's like, we're putting young people into family environments and we're not giving them the opportunity to do what every other child doing. Staying over at a friend's house is a completely normal thing. And then I heard this. I'll tell you what my risk assessment will be. I'm going to go there Friday evening. I'm going to shake the hands of the parents. I'm going to take their details. Luke is going to stay there for a weekend. And I was like, she goes, I'm going to have a really, really quiet weekend. And Luke's going to have a really great weekend. And if something happens, then you can blame me for it. And that's how it went down. And I was like, go on, do you know what I mean? And obviously, like, nothing happened. Like, I went and I had a few shandies. We played Xbox. We talked about rugby. I came home and my foster carers had a really wonderful weekend. Like, and this in that essence, what I saw my foster carer do in that position had so much message in it that I was valued, I was cared for, and at the same time, this person wanted to provide and to challenge the system, provide opportunities by challenging the system that had taken them away from me. I think there's so much in the way our system forces us to behave as adults, and the messages that there come with that to you.
And that is a natural thing that happened, going to a friend's house.
Yeah.
And going for a weekend, where in the system it's you need a break. We'll get a respite because we want you free of a problem. We'll give you a respite weekend. You're sent to a completely new environment where you don't know expected to be that this is a good thing for you. And I know we were short break respite carers, but the consistency was the winner for us. It wasn't a replacement. It was once a month, but generally that's what happens if the foster carers are said, no, you can't do this. So their only way of that kind of balanced life of what life is to go through, and the child at the center of it is treated as the problem, and is enhanced, where you go away empowered. You go away to be, I'm just like my friend, because my friend could come around to our house and do it the following weekend. And there's an element of that. So I think what I'm picking up from this is the importance of listening, the importance of treating, the importance of creating normal patterns. So when you're in placement, and at the basis, it's respect, and child and young person focused. You know, your foster carers respected you. They respected you, and you know, whether you responded right, whether you didn't, at times they respected you. They respected.
Yeah, it had no bearing on their level of respect for us, you know, regardless how you might respond in that situation, did not change for them what they were willing to do for us, you know. And unfortunately, those people don't come by every day in your care journey. You kind of get to know the ones who do, and you were able to, when you leave care, look back and go, oh, those were really the good ones. And it's not always a case of figuring out the good ones out of a bad bunch. It's sometimes just some of them were really extraordinary, you know, and some people were people and just did the right thing.
So is behavior then directly connected to bad social workers, bad foster carers, bad system. Suppose when we're talking about behaviour and what children are really telling us, is it because they're in a wrong placement? Is it because they're not being listened to at times? Is there anything deeper in that? I don't know. I'm asking the question.
I think the answer is yes to everything that you said, but it would say this list includes, but is not exclusive to, would be the caveat. I think that, yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why young people behave the way they behave. And yes, I think childhood experiences gives us a perception of the world around us and how we should operate within that world. But also, like, people perceive what acceptable behavior is in different circumstances. So it's kind of like this pseudo statement, I suppose, if we want to kind of like dig in a little bit deeper, like, what is behavior? Do you know what I mean? It's just a form of communication, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there is a reason why we are behaving in a particular way. There is something that we are trying to communicate, and I suppose that's the thing that we need to try and work out. And it's interesting, I suppose, that I'm just thinking out loud now. I don't have the answer. I don't think anybody does, but thinking out loud, I think it's more for me about the process of discovery, not figuring out why. Because like, if I'm coming to you, Dave, and I'm like, hey, Dave, like, you've just smashed your computer to pieces, and like, why did that happen? What's going on for you? You know, how are you feeling? Like, where is that in your body? Like, oh, here, yeah, your heart's a bit red. Yeah, okay. And what can we do about that? What do you need? You know, that, to me, that kind of process, and not giving up on that, and not. This is the thing about giving up. Just as a side point, I always think when we think about behavior, and we say, don't give up on children, I always visualize a young person kicking off, and you've got someone there going, I can't give up, I can't give up, I can't give up, I can't give up. That's what I always see. And I think that's also unintentionally communicated in our sector. To me, not giving up, like really not giving up, is being able to go through that process every day with trying to communicate with a young person, with, like we said before, the expectation of nothing in return, to just try and understand them and build a relationship, even when they push back, which is what they will, even when they say, I don't know, even when doors are closed, to not give up communicating in a way to understand. That's true not giving up to me, because that happens every day, where you communicate and getting nothing in return, whereas the outburst happens every now and then. Do you know what I mean? So to me, yeah, it's the thinking out loud from the question. It's the process of the discovery that shows that we care about people. We're not trying to say, I need to work out why you're behaving like that so I can write that down, and then in the future we're not going to do that behavior because it's linked to that experience. It's about saying, all young people that display behaviors, I'm going to make the commitment to try and understand, or help them understand where that's come from. And that's my approach to building relationships.
Absolutely. And I also think there's something in that with reinforcing behavior and being unaware that sometimes as adults, as professionals within social work, that we reinforce behavior. And I'll give you an example. I had entered care very early on. By the time I was 5, I'd had 15 different foster placements, but by the time I was 7, I was placed on a full care order, which pretty much meant that the judge has decided now that I should remain in the care of the local authority, children's services, until the foreseeable future, typically until you're 18. And so at the age of 7, as you can imagine, nobody had told me that. Nobody had one day come to me and said, you're on a full care order now. This is what it means in legal terms. You're never going home. Nobody had told me that. And bearing in mind some of my prior experiences just before or round about this court order time that I was unaware was happening behind the scenes, I had 15 different foster placements. And every time I'd gone to these foster placements, where did I go afterwards? Home. So in my mindset, this was the pattern of what children's social care was. So imagine then when I'm in foster placements post this care order that I have no idea what it is, and I'm expecting to go home, and that time's never coming. So what I do is I start acting in a certain way because I'm frustrated now. I don't understand the concept of time. I just know I'm fed up of being here at this point. My behavior is changing every day. And I never forget, a social worker came to me, probably I was like about 8 or 9, probably 2 years into this care order, I imagine, and said to me, Corral, look, if you keep breaking down these foster placements, me breaking them down. So one, red flag, worst thing she could have done is told me and reinforced to me that I have some power and control here. But if you keep breaking down these foster placements, there'll be nowhere left for you to go.
Oh my.
Dave, a lot of people have that response when I share this story. But do you know what I heard? White flag, SOS. This is it. If I keep doing this and there's nowhere else for me to go, the only other place for me to go is home. So now in my mindset, my only goal in this situation moving forward is to keep breaking down these placements. One, because now I know I can, because she's already confirmed for me that I have the power and control here in that instance. And two, that there will be no alternative option but for them to return me home. And so I played this game of cat and mouse until I was probably about, I don't know, 13, 14, when somebody actually asked me, why are you doing this? Or do you realize you're never going home? And until somebody was brave enough to tell me that that was never going to be an option on the table, but nobody was telling me. And so it continued to reinforce my behavior. And so whilst people, I suppose, as Luke was saying, were scratching their heads, figuring out, what do we do here? Why is she behaving like this? Nobody had recognized that the message that they had given to me at that time, really crucial time, was that I can do this because my end goal is just to go home. And nobody was telling me at any point that that option was no longer on the table, that these 15 different foster placements you had had prior to this care order and you keep returning home was not something we actually intended to happen. And it's now not something we're ever planning to do again. So now's the time to settle. So I think that's really, really key in recognizing sometimes the things we say, we think we're saying the right thing, or we think we're saying something to kind of scaremonger or put fear into children to get them to do what we want them to do. And actually it has a complete different effect.
At what stage did you get that? At what stage did you were you told that you weren't going home then in that journey?
I tell you, when I started getting to my teenage years, probably about, like I said, 12 or 13, and a different social worker, as you can imagine, at this point, had kind of spoke to my sister and I, and she had said kind of something around, well, Corel, because you're going to leave care at one point, and you've got to start thinking about. And I thought, what do you mean leave care? You get to leave here. Like, I'm not here forever. And it's those different points in time along my care journey that are significant. And Luke and I really try to emphasize to people in all different spaces, whether they be professionals or adults or teaching staff and so forth, is that we assume we're telling children and young people across this journey these significant points, and we're not telling them. Nobody told me that coming into foster care meant you always went home. Nobody told me at age 7, 8 or 9 that a full care order meant you're not going home. Nobody had bothered to tell me throughout the rest of that period until my teenage years that I can leave care at some point, and all these different kinds of things. And so some of these things that I was being told at different stages were just assumed I knew because I'm in care, and therefore I should have a social work qualification of care. And that's not true at all. I just knew my experience and knew what my end goal was, to try and go home. So when they told me, when the social worker at the time had said, because, you will be able to go home at some point, leave care at some point, that was it. Again, that became my only other goal now. My only goal now was to leave care, and I was going to do whatever it took to get everybody, by the time I was 15, breaching 16, to just let me go. To just let me go.
Wow.
And unfortunately, they do sometimes, because it's the easier option, because my behaviors at this point now, we're no longer talking about the 7 or 8-year-old who's not, I suppose, doing what families would like 7-year, 8-year-olds to do in a home, that they just want to love and look after you. I'm now 13, 14, 15. I'm no longer considered cute anymore. I'm annoying. I'm a teenager. I'm aggressive. I'm all these things that also impact on how you're viewed and how your behaviors are seen. You know, at 7 and 8, I was doing the exact same behaviors. If you look at the list of behaviors at 7 and 8 to at 13, 14, I was doing the exact same things. I was fighting against the system. I was talking back. But I suppose people found me cuter then, you know, than they did when I was a teenager. People forgot that I was that 7-year-old at one point and, you know, was still doing those similar things. But yeah, I think that it's all, you always have to be clear about, have you, forget just the messages in the young people's behaviors, but are you giving them the messages that either support a change in behavior if that's what's needed, or that help you understand what the behavior is. And I think that's, you know, sometimes it's hard, isn't it? Luke knows.
Yeah, recognizing our impact in that narrative for that child, isn't it? It's kind of saying, hang on a minute, and because I've heard that stories and I love it every single time I hear it. I just love your brain. It's like, you carry on doing this and there'll be nowhere left for you to go, and you're like, home, like, do you know what I mean? Okay, cool. And it's like, it's them moments where workers should just be going, oh.
Yeah.
But they'll never admit it. A lot of the time they don't admit it. They're just kind of like, no, you knew what I meant and you knew this. And it gets into that space. And I think that's where it can kind of reinforce power battles and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, I suppose what is our impact and the words that we use and how we communicate, and to just kind of like build on that one point, actually, again, with a carer that I had. I remember things like this. If you don't come home on time, I will call the police. And I'm like, all right, cool. Then I'm not coming home on time. I'm going to see if you're going to do that. And I would be an hour late home, or however, I might even wait to see the police officer arrive and walk in and be like, oh, yes, I'm late. And then you go through the paper. And I played those games, right? Because I was a frustrated, upset young person. Like, for what I'm not gonna butter it up. I knew what I was doing. I'm not gonna excuse my past for my behavior. I was being disruptive intentionally because there was some power battle going on. And I expected that as well. I kind of expected that. I expected the rule book to be shown when I come into the foster home. I knew I was treated differently. Like, and this is something that I think we also should own as care experienced people, is that when we go into homes, I certainly owned it when I was, from my perspective, is that I was treated differently. I was different to the birth children. Like, and whether or not the families try and include you, and some foster families do it great, you always do feel like you because you are, there's a different relationship. So so these rule books and then these narratives that we then give to children when they come into, and we start to do those things. If you're late home, I'll call the police. So what I learned there is a behavior from them that goes, right, if this, there's a way here to annoy these people. If I get into some sort of issue, which you always will, every teenager gets into issues with their parents, and you have power battles, so you use whatever tools you can to win. And I remember one foster carer, she's like, I was like, I'm going to run away. And then instead of the other foster carers that say, we're going to call the police, she'd go, well, we'll be really worried about your safety if you do that. I'm not coming home tonight. Why? It's freezing outside. You've got a really warm bed. Do you know what I mean? Like, why would you do that? Fine. If you're really adamant on doing that, then go for it. You know, we'll still be here when you arrive in the morning. Right. But you're not going to call the police. Well, what's the point? You're just going to go to your mate's house. You're not going to be unsafe. And it was kind of like this dialogue. And another situation was where, like, I spent my pocket money on cigarettes, and I told them it was a train ticket. And what I was also told was, you know, you're entitled to this pocket money. This was a previous foster carer. So when it was taken off me, I'd go, that's my entitlement. You take that off me, I'm going to ring my social worker and you're going to get fired. And you'd wait for them to look at each other like this and go, is he right? And I'd be like, I'll take that back, thank you very much. And you're just like, whatever. Same foster carers that weren't going to bring the police. I come home and all my cigarette packets are on the table. I'd obviously just stuff them down the side of the bed, because eventually that black hole opens and just sucks away all of the evidence. At some point in life, I'm still pretty confident that when I hide evidence down the side of the bed, that black hole will come along and get rid of it. It's not happened yet, but I have hope. But I come home and the cigarette packets are on the table, and foster care does that thing we all do. He goes, is there something you need to tell me? It's like, I know and you know, it's very clear what's the situation here. And she says, oh, well, we're taking your pocket money off you. And I was like, no, you're not. That's my entitlement. If you do that, I'll call my social worker and you'll get fired. pulls the phone out of his pocket and says, "Go on then, like go on then, ring them." Do you know? And it was these kind of interactions that you never expected. I think that as a young person, I certainly worked people out, and I expected how they would respond to my behaviour. And I would do particular things to get particular responses if I was in some kind of dispute with them, whatever that normal dispute is, by the way. It is normal stuff. Everyone does this. We get into disputes with each other based on the ego or whatever you want to call it. But, you know, and these foster carers are like, I can see what you're doing there, mate. I can see what you're trying, and I'm just going to sidestep it. And this particular foster care, if I just to finish on this particular note, which I thought was really, really, really powerful thing to say to me, was said, we trust everybody and we trust you, actually. And I remember being really taken aback by that, because I'd never been told before that I was trustworthy. I was told the opposite. You know, how are we ever supposed to trust you if you behave like this, was the kind of narrative. And you've got to understand, young man, you earn people's trust. Trust isn't given. That was the narrative that was communicated to me, and I had to behave in a particular way to get this trust. And this foster carer said to me, "We trust everybody. We're not going to ask you to earn our trust, Luke, because people have broke your trust in the past. So to you, you're not going to value it. And in fact, why should we make you value something that has been broken for you? And like, who are we to say you should earn our trust? Like, what makes us so special for you to want to earn it? Like, and we give everybody trust, actually." And she said something really powerful to me. She says, "Do you know why most people ask the trust to be earned?" And you know, at this point, I'm still looking at the cigarette packets on the table, thinking, why are we having a deep, loving chat now? I'm waiting to get told off, and I'm talking about trust, and I feel fluffy and warm inside. This is completely blowing my mind. She said, and most people will ask you to earn their trust because they've been hurt in the past, just like you have. And to ask you to earn their trust is a self-defense mechanism. If I know that you've earned my trust, I know you won't hurt me. She says, we're just willing to take that risk because the reward certainly outweighs that risk of having relationships with people based on trust. And I was like, and I didn't get my pocket money after all of that, to be fair. It gave me a tenner to listen to it, but I didn't. It's still taken off me. So yeah, I think.
Great. I think we're coming to an end in this session. If you could kind of make one last thing that you think kind of wraps this up that you wanted to say to the listeners today, or the people viewing it today, what would it be? Corel, you go first in this.
I think I'll just go to my red flag, white flags, Dave. And I think, again, just reiterating that there are certain times in behavior that the adults around us show us, sometimes that they're even unaware that they're showing us, that raises a red flag for us. And that in itself, as Luke mentioned earlier, becomes a trigger. And that in itself influences how we then behave. And even if you've recognized that you've somewhat raised a red flag for us based on trust or previous childhood experience or whatever it might be, we might not show or display that behavior today or tomorrow or even in 6 months. But then when it comes back to us again as the trigger, as Luke mentioned, we will then display it. And so then you're left trying to scratch your head, figuring out why and what's going on. But it was because you showed us that red flag, and that red flag is you can't be trusted, or you're just like that other person, or you're just exactly what I thought it was going to be. In addition, the white flag, the SOS call, the behaviors that young people are displaying that aren't just about, I just feel like doing this, or I can control situations, or I just want to annoy somebody. Most of the time, some of them are just, I don't know what I'm doing here. I need help in this situation, and I feel completely powerless, and I just need somebody to save me. And like Luke mentioned, when you've got that, what you consider your white flag out calling for help, even though you can't visually see the child holding the flag and that's what they're asking for, when that's not responded to, and when that's not met, that need that we spoke about in the last podcast about needs, when that basic need of a response is not met, that young person doesn't know what to do. So what they start to do is they start waving the white flag. They start to learn there is just no point here in doing this for that response. And so when you're ready to respond in that way, they've disengaged from it. You know, it just becomes a part and parcel of their behavioral pattern with you now. And it can be really difficult, I suppose, to backtrack and start again. So yeah, always think, is this a red flag moment or a white flag moment?
It's good. Anything you want to add to that, Luke?
Yeah, I think it's great going second, because I can listen to everything that Carell says and just steal most of it. It's wonderful. It's pretty much how we work, isn't it, Carell? Really.
Hold on, I'm calling a red flag.
Yeah.
This is triggering me, Luke.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, not sorry. Yeah, I think three things for me is, and I just want to read a quote by someone that I consider as a guide and a coach of mine called Tony Clifford, who's the founder of the House Project. It says, children don't come into care because of what they've done. They come into care because of what's being done to them. And I think that's a really important message to first start on and say. I think that the second thing that I want to leave out of the three with is that for adults to focus more on the process of understanding what's happening for the young person, rather than figuring it out as the thing to solve it. It's the process of trying to understand why, and to have that process with the young person, because to hold that space of empathy with the young person, they may not know and understand either why they're doing it the way they're doing it, but to have a person that they can reflect with and to feel supported by and to try and figure that out themselves is important. And the final thing is to stop seeing it as challenging behaviour and to start seeing it as young people becoming emotionally overwhelmed. If we do that, I think that we approach it differently, because I've got a saying that says you don't have to sharpen a pencil to improve its ability to draw fine lines. You just change the way they hold it. So changing the way you hold it here is to change it from seeing challenging behaviour and your response to that, and change it to being emotionally overwhelmed, and then your response to that is completely different. So
that's brilliant. What amazing stuff today in this whole area, and it just shows me how complex it is. But we can take away some simple things to do, and that is that I love that red flag and the SOS. The kind of trying to understand. I love the listening approach. The behaviors out of that. I really feel that again, it's just reinforcing my view that if we see a child focused, young person focused, try to get to the place of their value and worth, our actions will be different. And that's what I'm loving about this. I think at the core of everything we're going to talk about over this whole series, it'll probably be down to that. Let's think of the child. Let's think of the behaviors. Let's think of what they're feeling, what they're doing. Let's try and get to the depths of that and put the child at the center of it, and our behaviors will be different. So until next time, to our listeners, we are done for this session, and we'll catch up with you again very soon.